We now welcome Ipshita Gayen from the University of Alberta, Canada, who is going to talk about social influences on seasonal catching in black-capped chickadees.
Hello everyone. I am Ipshita. I'm a PhD student at University of Alberta, Canada, and today I'm happy to share my work about black-capped chickadees and how they cache and a behavior that they use to prepare for winter. So getting right away into it. So first thing is, what is caching? Caching is a behavior where individuals store food when it's comparatively abundant and use it as a supplemental food resource when it's comparatively limited. By doing so, it increases its foraging efficiency when the food is less abundant. And specifically for many birds, including the bird I'm working and a few other birds and even mammals, a highest intensity of caching is usually observed in autumn and fall. And they do this caching in response to the oncoming winter where the food abundance is comparatively lower. So they store the food, they remember where there is, and when winter comes along, they go back and use it as and when needed. The specific bird that I'm working with is called Black-Capped Chickadee. It is from the Prairie family and it is found all throughout North America. It has its range starting from Alaska all through Canada and north of USA. It's a quite tiny bird and it's non-migrating. So when the winter arrives, it does not has an option to go to warmer regions with more food abundance. It stays there. And the winter here, the red mark over here shows the location I'm working at, and that is Edmonton. And the winters are quite harsh in some way for these birds because they're very small, so their small mass leads to comparatively large body surface area to mass ratio. That means they are very prone to losing heat when they are trying to maintain their core body temperature. The foraging window in winter can also be very short. So, for example, here in Edmonton, when winter arrives in peak winter, we only get like 7 hours of day length. And these birds are diurnal, so they can only forage during the day. So they only have like 7 to 8 hours to forage so that they can survive over the night of 16 hours. So they have to increase their overnight body mass so that they don't starve. And it has been measured that the amount of body fat reserves they need in winter, it could be as much as twice that of in fall. So that means they have very short duration so that they can forage enough to survive the winter nights. So they use different strategies. The one I am interested in is using caching, where they store food at whenever they find in fall and use it as a supplemental resource. So that acts as an external energy resource. And because they can remember it, they can easily access as and when needed. However, caching traditionally has been a bit difficult to observe in this species and related species because they are scatter hoarding, which means each food item is stored at a different location. Unlike squirrels, where they store food at one location, these birds, they find the food and they store at a different location under the barks, in the trees, crevices, wherever they can find. And that makes it difficult for human observers to keep a track of individual level foraging, where the bird is going, where the food is being stored, which limited the number of studies in wild. However, there has been multiple strong theory-driven optimal caching models, which has been developed back in 1990s and early 2000s, which are like still not sufficiently tested in wild. So I'm using those model to to find a baseline of what are the different predictions that I can test and how different modulators, environmental factors can affect caching in black-capped chickadees. So there are multiple factors that might affect. The one that I am focusing on for this presentation is seasonal change and dominance. So this is a prediction. This I will first introduce my predictions. So here I have on x-axis day in autumn and y-axis predicted caching efforts. And this is based on a model by Bruden and Clark in 1997. And they say that, and it is also based a bit on observation. And they say that the caching should start early in autumn and then it peaks mid-autumn and then it falls as we go closer to the winter, because as we go closer, the temperature drops, the foraging window drops, making it difficult for birds to have extra flights required for caching. I did my first experiment around late fall. So during this period, if caching is happening, and if that is visible through the experimental design that I'm doing, then it should decrease over as we go closer to the winter. The second factor that I'm interested in is dominance and how it affects caching. But to understand how dominance affect caching, one needs to first understand how dominance affect food accessibility. So birds like chickadee in their non-breeding season, they would have flocks where individual birds have ranks, and based on the ranks, they get access to different food items or resources in the environment. So the top ranking bird usually have the highest priority access to the resources. So here we have multiple birds sitting on a feeder. The bird inside the feeder, the one with the crown, that one is comparatively dominant. So other birds are waiting until the dominant bird gets its food. There are different indicators that can be used to approximate an individual's rank, or as I will call it, proxies for dominance. The first proxy I am using is sex. So males are dominant on females. In the presentation, I will show this tiny crown to show which bird is more dominant. The second proxy I'm using is foraging area. So between dominant and subordinate individuals, dominants can monopolize their foraging area, which lead to subordinate individual increasing their foraging area. So if we compare, dominants will have comparatively smaller foraging areas compared to subordinate birds. So how does it tie back to the caching? Because caching is an insurance for future when there will be less food predictability or abundance, but dominants have high food accessibility wherever. So even when the food is quite limited in winter or other regions, they will still have the first access to that limited food. And because caching in itself is a very energy intensive process where birds take extra flights without eating it directly but rather storing them for future, dominants should not need to invest that much energy and cost for doing caching. So it's predicted that between dominant and subordinate bird, dominant birds would have lower caching as compared to subordinate because they don't need to invest that much because they will have good access in future. To test it, I did my study in a wild black-capped chickadee population that is at University of Alberta Botanical Garden. Here we have wild population with a pit tag on the legs, so which is shown over here in the red marking. And whenever these birds go visit our feeder, we get information on their identity as well as when they visited, which gives us information of their foraging investment using the food we are providing. We do this experiment in a mixed forest with 8 different feeders, which are separated approximately 270 meters apart. To get the dominance proxies, I use sex and number of feeders. In our population, we established that birds which are comparatively more dominant have smaller feeding area. In fact, they would only limit themselves to one feeder, and subordinate birds will have comparatively bigger foraging area. So they will have a larger number of unique feeders they use. To understand caching, we did a choice test between mid-October to November in 2023. In this experiment of choice test, we provided at each of these 8 locations with 2 feeders, one with comparatively non-cacheable food that is peanut butter, another is black oil sunflower seed, which was cacheable food. We did observation to confirm that one was more cacheable than the other. And so whenever the birds visited during this choice test, they would have an option to choose between 2 food types. And that will give us a relative and absolute measure of how much they invested in each food type throughout the day and throughout the season. I had around 91 births and 154,000 visits. So it was quite a high resolution information on the daily foraging investment. So what did I find? So first I will show results for seasonal change. So on the x-axis, I have day of choice test, and on y-axis, I have daily feeder visits of individual based on the mixed effect models. And what I found is the non-cashable food, which was peanut butter, that did not change much or at all statistically significantly throughout the study period. In fact, it was quite low. But there was interesting results about the cashable food, that is the seeds, and seeds being one of the most commonly stored food even in wild population. And what I found is over the season it declined. And I say that this means that there was a change in cashing investment by the individual because of two reasons. First, during this period of time, there was temperature decline. So whenever we have temperature decline in our population during winter, we see that the birds increase their foraging rates to meet the energetic demands. But even after this decline in their temperature, we found that there is still it should increase the foraging, but it still declined. And the second is at the end of this choice test, the measures we have for daily foraging is quite similar to what we usually see in winter. So that means at the beginning, they were foraging twice of what they need. And that is probably what was being cached. So over this period of time, there was a seasonal decline in caching as was predicted by the models. My second objective was about dominance. So first was the prediction was dominance would cache less than subordinate. And here I will show differences in sex, where males are being dominant over females, males being in an orangish, brownish color, and female being in blue color. And what I found is opposite of what I predicted. So males that are dominant sex had a higher caching rates. Now I will also present before I discuss the other proxy of dominance, that is the foraging area. And here we have multiple feeders. The birds that used multiple feeders were subordinate, and the birds that did not use were dominant. So the dominant individual should be colored in yellow, oranges, and the subordinate is in purple. Again, I see that the birds which are dominant actually have a higher caching rates. This is in opposite to the prediction, and both the proxies of dominance show that dominance cache more than the subordinate. So why did the data not follow a model which was based on theory and optimization based on mathematical models? For this, I will introduce another idea that might have affected this combination. That is food abundance. So the way food abundance affects caching when we are compared dominant and subordinate is that when the food is quite abundant during caching periods, subordinates will cache more than the dominant. But if the food is quite limited, then it's possible that caching rates between dominant and subordinate are similar. So what might have happened in our population is that the food that we provided them might be considered as low abundance, which led to competition between dominant and subordinate. And if there is a competition, dominants usually win. So that might have limited subordinates to meet their caching requirements. So I will be chasing some of these tales for the rest of my PhD. So stay tuned for further research. But for now, the conclusion is caching in black-capped chickadee is seasonal and can be observed through supplemented food. The caching propensity is might be more driven by access to food rather than who needs to cache. Overall, this study provides insight about energy management strategies in small birds, and it also shows us like a design of experiment where low human efforts, which had limited the studies in wild to quantify caching, and it also experimentally evaluates supports for different moderators in the before and in the future studies. I would like to thank different funding agencies that have helped make this experiment possible. My supervisor, Kim Method, who has enormously helped design the project. My lab mates for continuous support. Yon for making sure fieldwork happens properly. And the small birds who unknowingly participated in this experiment. Thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Here is a link to the paper if you want to read more on it.
Great talk, Ipshita. Thank you very much. We already have several questions from the audience. For example, one from Buster. Have you thought about replicating the experiment but trying to observe catches over multiple days instead of just one day?
So we are currently doing some experiments. So last time we did the study in October, November, and we have now pushed the study much forward. So we are doing starting in August, and we have some interesting data of happening, what happens in early in the season. So yeah.
Mm. I have a question. Do you have any information about how does flock size influence catching frequency across season?
That is a very interesting question. So, in fact, I am looking. So we are trying to invest that question how the flock size might affect caching. So, when we first put out feeders, so in this study, there was like the feeders when they put out, there was a pre-experimental period. So all the
Mm,
birds were already there. But for this year, we put the feeders out very early, and we are looking at as the number of birds increase, how does that affect individual investment in foraging? And looking
mm,
at a combination of competition as well as like flock safety. So yeah.
I see. Right. And do you think seasonal food condition modify social effects on catching behavior?
Mm-hmm. Uh, so it is possible that like the how much, so for our experiment we provide them with seeds, so that makes the food predictability as a constant. So that would affect how they would predict caching, because food predictability itself affects like how much caching is being done. So
Mm,
when we compare it back to the natural settings, the change in food predictability should definitely affect. So, yeah. So we are doing another experiment where we provide food for some time and then not food to see that how the change in food predictability like changes their caching investment.
Thank you. If you have more questions for Ipsita, you can post them on Discord. Thank you again, Ipsita. See you.
See ya.